Welcome to this lecture on accessibility. This section will be called Semantic HTML in the Advanced HTML and CSS course. As useful as div and span elements can be as generic containers, they are not always the most A11Y friendly elements to use. While it may be tempting or easier to just use them for everything from containers to interactive areas, you should not only check whether there is a more appropriate element to use in certain situations, but also whether you are using an element correctly. Learning outcomes, what we are supposed to learn, explain why semantic HTML is important for accessibility. Name the 7 HTML elements that define landmarks on a page. The importance of semantics. In terms of web accessibility A11Y, using semantic HTML is important because it provides meaning and context. Some elements have a semantic meaning but don't really provide any context when announced by assistive technologies such as the P element. Then there are elements that have a semantic meaning and are announced with some sort of context to help users perceive or operate them, like a button. The div and span elements, most likely two of the more common elements you use, are semantically neutral. That is, they themselves have no semantic meaning and provide no context on their own to assistive technologies, which can make it more difficult for users of such technologies to perceive, operate, or understand them. Don't let this lack of semantics and context make you feel like you can never use a div or span ever again, though. They still have their uses as generic containers, such as for layouts or for generic text. Okay, let's look at an actual example to help better understand this whole semantics and context thing. Think of any project you may have completed so far that required a user to click on something: rock, paper, scissors, calculator, tic-tac-toe, any application. If you use div or span elements for any clickable areas, things most likely worked as intended for you. For example, perhaps you have something similar to the HTML below for your rock, paper, scissors UI back in Foundations. So there is a div class button container. Inside there are 3 divs. One is of class rock, content is rock. Similarly for paper, class paper and content paper, scissors class with content of scissors. A sighted user would most likely have no trouble playing the game if these elements look like something to interact with. A screen reader user, however, would have no idea what any of these elements mean. The screen reader will announce the text contents of the elements only: rock, paper, or scissor, and the user might think it's just plain text on the page and move on. There's no context to tell the user that they're supposed to or that they even can interact with these elements. The issue can be easily fixed by using semantic HTML. How can we do that? So now we are updating the tags, the divs to buttons with a class of rock, content of rock, and similarly for the other 2 buttons. Because the button element has a semantic meaning and provides context, a screen reader would announce the text content as well as the role of the element: rock, button. Using semantic HTML correctly. When it comes to using semantic HTML correctly, you want to think about what your intent for users is and what context you want or need to provide to them. This can vary depending on the situation, but there are some things that you should absolutely be checking for moving forward. 1. If a user is meant to click something, whether it's an actual button or not, you will usually want to use a button element. This will let the user know that they can interact with the element by clicking on it. If you want to provide some sort of tabular data to a user, use a table element along with the elements related to it. This will allow a user to more easily navigate and understand the data being presented. When you use an input element, you should always create a relationship between it and a label element. A label provides context for what an input actually means to assistive technologies, announcing the label contents each time the input is announced. Not only that, but a proper label increases the clickable area of the input itself, which is useful for users who have trouble clicking on smaller items. There are 2 ways you can create this relationship. So one, using label for the input type text, ID name, and the label is also font name. And label without any ID, so just label, name, and the input text inside the label tag. Continuing with inputs, you should always use the type that makes the most sense for its intended use. Type text makes more sense for a name or address field, while type email or type tel would of course make more sense for an email or telephone field respectively. For certain devices, using the correct type may show only the required or additional characters on the keyboard. A type tel input, for example, might make it much easier for users to fill out their phone number by providing larger numerical only keys on mobile or tablet devices. When you want to present a list of some sort to a user, you should use the appropriate list element, OL, UL, or DL, and the related list item elements. This will not only let the user know when they are entering or exiting a list, but also how many items are in the list. Headings and landmarks. Headings are the H1 through H6 elements, and like the name implies, these elements act as headings to sections of a page. Landmarks, on the other hand, are HTML elements that act as regions of a page. There are 7 native HTML elements that define these landmark regions. Can you guess what are these 7? We have the list: aside, a footer, form, header, main, nav, and section. So these are given in the alphabetical order. By properly using landmarks and headings, you provide users of assistive technologies a more operable and understandable page. Not only can screen readers users navigate a page via landmarks and headings by using navigation keyboard commands or opening a menu in the screen reader, but these elements also have their roles announced to provide additional context. These were all added in HTML5, so these were not there in HTML4 before, but now in HTML5 we have these new tags. If you were to use only div elements to act as these landmarks and headings, maybe adding it in some CSS to visually style them, then a screen reader user would have to go through the entire page just to get to a specific section, and they may not be able to actually tell what is a heading or a landmark on the page. As an assignment, you can take this up. Read how screen readers navigate data tables. So this is to see a great example of just how much context a proper table element provides. There is also a video at the end of the blog post if you want to hear how a table is announced. Watch why headings and landmarks are so important to see how a screen reader interacts with the heading and landmark elements. Knowledge check. Why is semantic HTML important for accessibility? So because of the structure, now the screen readers and other assistive technologies can identify the elements on your page or app. What are the 7 HTML elements that define landmarks on a page? So there are 7 of them, and we have to use them appropriately in our applications. Additional resources. NV Access provides a download of the NVDA screen reader, one of the more popular and free screen readers available. Though it is only available for the Windows OS, this is the only time where we are saying it's okay to use Windows in the scope of this curriculum. If you are using a Mac OS device, you should have the voice over screen reader available to you by default. While the lessons in this section will provide you with what a screen reader will generally announce, it can be invaluable to start using a screen reader yourself to test out your projects and see how they might be perceived. Screen Reader Basics VoiceOver and Screen Reader Basics NVDA go over some basics for getting started with both brands of screen reader. Both videos are worth watching regardless of which screen reader you choose and is available to you, as they contain some universal information as well. Screen Reader Basics Orca is a good video to get yourself started using Orca, the Linux GUI screen reader. Screen Reader Basics ChromeVox is a starting place for learning to use ChromeVox, the screen reader on Chromebooks. Area Landmarks example lists the native HTML elements that define landmark regions as well as what their role is. If you check this resource out, be sure to enable the button toggles at the top of the page to see how the page is sectioned by landmarks and how it uses headings. With that, we come to the end of this lecture. We'll move on to the next one.